Welcome to Salon Talks. Today I'm sitting down with the journalist Gretchen Carlson. She's the former Fox News host, and she's now the host and executive producer of a new documentary on Lifetime. It's called Gretchen Carlson, Breaking the Silence. It's a 2-hour film and it covers stories of sexual harassment, abuse from women across the country. Welcome to the show, Gretchen.
Thanks for having me, Lexi.
There are still so many stories that have not been told when it comes to sexual harassment in the workplace. I'm on a mission to give voice to these untold stories.
He just grabs me, he locked me in.
And to challenge those in power.
Gretchen Carlson, Breaking the Silence.
2.5 years ago, when you were thinking about coming forward, there wasn't that precedent. There wasn't that idea that, oh, other women are talking. So first, I just want to start off talking about you and taking us back to that moment when you came forward with your story.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it seems hard to believe even now because every day for me is still sort of surreal because I had no way of knowing how this was all going to turn out. And if you fast forward to present day, it's like we're in this cultural revolution and it's just been an amazing experience. But I would, start off by saying that it's not an easy decision for anyone to make, especially when I did it 2.5 years ago. And courage building is a process. So it took me some time to come to the decision of what I was going to do. Not knowing what would happen in the next minute. But I think in my story, people saw consequences. So within 2 weeks of my case coming forward, my alleged perpetrator was fired. And he was a very high-level television executive. And I think other women across the country thought, holy cow, maybe I have a shot if I come forward that somebody might believe me. And so I think it started this whole wave that we've been experiencing where, people have felt more comfortable coming forward. And the whole Me Too movement then spun out of that. And it really brought me to the documentary that I wanted to feature more of the every woman story instead of just famous Hollywood actress stories. And that's really what our focus was, because those are the women that I've heard from by the thousands since my story broke.
And women reached out to you like in emails and like, can you talk about that a little bit? The other stories that started coming in before
so the amazing thing was that, here I was after my story, not knowing what was going to happen. And I thought I was just going to be sitting home crying every day because I'd been fired from my 27-year career in television. And actually what really buoyed my spirits during some of those darkest times were all the women that started reaching out to me. I mean, now their stories were incredibly sad because they were all very similar, unfortunately. They were all, I was harassed on the job. I had the courage to come forward. I was promptly demoted, blacklisted, and fired, and I never worked in my chosen profession ever again. I mean, so they were incredibly sad stories, but at the same time, they buoyed me because I realized, oh my gosh, I am not alone in this pervasive epidemic. And it made me realize that there was so much work to be done. And that this crossed across every socioeconomic level and every state and every profession. And so in a way, it made me feel really empowered that so many of these women felt comfortable enough to reach out to me and basically back then even say, me too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really see it in your film because you go to so many different cities. And just want to give people at home a little bit of a taste of the film. You talk to a firefighter, nurse's aide, and then you really focus in on these McDonald's workers. And I want to give people a little bit of a preview of what they can expect with the film. Can you tell us a little bit about Tanya that you met her in New Orleans?
Yeah, so Tanya was one of the first people that we went to visit over the summertime. I spent a couple of months traveling across the country, getting to know these women. We featured 6, as you said, 3 from McDonald's. Tanya was working for minimum wage at McDonald's. She was supporting her entire extended family on her salary. She's 21 years old and told me horrific stories of alleged not only harassment when she went to complain, nothing happened, but also she had the really dark, horrible story of being attempted rape in a bathroom while she was working. Allegedly by a McDonald's colleague. And I think aside from sharing these horrific stories, the documentary Breaking the Silence also is me trying to get answers for these women. And that was really important to them because they trusted me to tell these really painful stories. But I think that they also felt like, wow, Gretchen's jumping out of cars and trying to chase these people down,
Yeah, like literally.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's because I care about them.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was actually different about what you've done here is like you really get into the really disgusting details of some of the stuff that happened to these women, and whether you're quoting from cases that they've put forward or you're literally asking them, why'd you make that decision to really, it paints this picture where it's shocking to hear these things, but
Yeah.
it's not, you can imagine that this would happen to someone that you might know.
I know. So yeah, we had a lot of bleeps when I was reading from the complaints, because there's a lot of F-bombs, and not from these women reacting to what happened to them, which might be logical, but actually what men were saying, what they wanted to do to them. And I really wanted to, listen, if I was going to tell these stories, I wanted to give it to the American public raw and real, because this is what's happening every single day in the workplace for millions of women. And so why sugarcoat it? Like it wouldn't have had the same impact to say, oh yeah, somebody said, that they liked, her body or something like that. No, it was much worse than that. And I have to tell you, of all the thousands of women who have reached out to me, these are not just little stories about, hey, I like your haircut or I like your blue top. These are horrific things like asking for a promotion just 2 years ago and a woman being told to get up on the desk and spread. And, the idea that somebody still has to listen to that garbage while they're in the workplace is just absolutely unconscionable. And I think that the American public, that's one of the reasons that this whole movement has continued, is because the American public could not believe that this kind of stuff was still going on.
Yeah, and it continues, and that's why we really need films like yours. Also, when you went face to face with some of the men who just are in the line of command of management at some of these places. One of them is the Fairfax County Fire Department. You talked to the interim chief there, and you really asked him about the sexual harassment policy there, and his response to you was, well, we have a zero tolerance policy. And at that point in the film, I was just like, throwing my water. I was like, what do you mean zero tolerance policy?
I know.
Can you talk a little bit about those? And a lot of us hear that term, and what does that really mean?
I know. It's so frustrating, especially after all the work I've been trying to do for the last couple of years, because I think really companies can hide behind this zero tolerance policy. It's kind of a cover your ass facade. It's like, well, we say that we have zero tolerance for it, but if we were really honest with everyone, that's not working. I mean, you might say you have a policy, but my dad told me all the time growing up that people will be able to tell what kind of person you are by your actions, not your words. And the same thing is, holds true for corporations. They think they can hide behind these so-called policies and think that they're safe. And really, they're not providing a safe work environment for the majority of women who, when they still come forward, are maligned, hidden, fired. And we need to, my greatest hope from this documentary is that companies will become more introspective and realize that this is not a passing fad. And that if they really want to be progressive and in front of the system, and by the way, increase their bottom line by retaining women, that they will then start thinking about better changes and getting away from just saying they have these zero tolerance policies, because they're not working. They're absolutely not working.
Yeah. Did you think about this at all? Like why companies aren't willing to do this hard work? Like why haven't we moved the needle at all? Why is it so hard to have harassment training?
It's a great question. So a lot of companies do have harassment training. You're probably too young, but the Anita Hill hearings, 20 some years ago, I think woke up a lot of companies to actually incorporating policies and training. But then they also found out about this little thing called an arbitration clause in employment contracts. And what that means is that 60 million Americans have these clauses. It means that if you have any kind of a dispute at work, you don't get to go to an open jury process if you so choose. You're forced into this secret chamber called arbitration. And the problem with that regarding sexual harassment is that nobody ever knows about your story. And kind of if you go complain about it, the person in human relations might be like, phew, like, woo, yay, nobody will ever hear about this woman's story because we can hide her in arbitration. And that's what's been happening to a huge majority of cases. And then the other side is that a lot of them are being settled, like my story. And so then there are all these confidentiality clauses within those settlements. And so the women can never tell you their stories from that perspective either. So I think that's how companies have been able to shield themselves from any negative press about what may be going on. Instead, like, wouldn't it just be so much better to own up and try to fix the problem from the beginning? And imagine if an executive running a company would say that the buck stops with me, and from the top down, I'm not going to allow this to happen inside of my company. And by the way, if you come forward, we'll actually celebrate you for having the courage for doing so. We need to really flip training and the way that we're looking at this issue 180 degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about a lot of the legal battles, or like it's more just like roadblocks and hurdles that a woman might face after she's decided she wants to come forward. Well, like that's not it. That's really just the beginning of what she might endure. I want to talk specifically about McDonald's, because that was a part that we talked about that you focused on in the documentary. And it sounds like the company really is trying to hide behind this idea that they franchise out all of the restaurants and that the franchisee is really responsible for what goes on there. And you mentioned jumping out of cars. You actually did that when you tried to confront one of these franchisee owners. Can you talk about that a little bit and why the structure, it feels like it's impossible then to get anything done or to really hold anybody accountable if the blame's all spread out?
First of all, thank you for the question. The first interesting thing is that another network actually did some of these interviews with these McDonald's workers and chose not to air them. So that shows you the power of big corporations in America and advertising dollars.
Because of what would have happened to.
Yeah, well then, so then they would have, I guess, felt the wrath of a big company not advertising on their network anymore. We've seen that happen with other sexual harassment stories. I have to give a shout out to Lifetime for having the bravery to allow me to go out and do these interviews, really focus on McDonald's. We had many conversations with the PR people at McDonald's about how, it would be so much better if they would just come on the record and do an interview with me, similar to the fire chief, who I'm sure that wasn't a great day for him, but at least he did the interview. And they chose to just give us a statement. And I guess the main focus on their statement is that they do have all these franchisees across the country. And so they really kind of pass along the responsibility to them individually to come up with sexual harassment training for their employees and the consequences that they might face. But as we point out in the doc, if McDonald's has a tainted lettuce problem across America or in just one region, they don't just say, well, let's have the franchisees handle that on their own. They come up with a policy from the top on down. And similarly, everyone has the same recipe for French fries, right? I mean, it's not like they just allow people to kind of go off and do whatever they want. So I was just trying to get them to respond to whether or not they were going to actually make a change with policies regarding sexual harassment. And I appreciate that you're giving it attention, because it's one of these things where if we continue to allow big companies to be able to hide and shy away from this because they're powerful with advertising dollars, we're never going to fix this. That's kind of this sick, horrible cycle that we find ourselves in, is that if we don't tell the stories, then we're not going to make it better. And that was the whole point of the doc.
When we see all the Me Too stories trickling out, sometimes it's a tidal wave, sometimes it's one after another. You see these big executives all across the media industry being taken down. Their careers are sort of over now. That's easy to see, okay, maybe some change is happening. But then when I see stories like the ones you've uncovered, it's like, oh yeah, but we have so much more to do. And wow, there are so many hurdles. So I'm trying to find reasons to be hopeful. And I want to know how you're finding that too, because it's hard.
It is. And, since this has become sort of my life work over the last 2.5 years, I have to wake up every morning optimistic. In fact, I keep this bracelet on 24/7, which says "Be Fierce," which is the title of the book that I wrote after all of this. It reminds me when I wake up every morning, even if I don't feel like it, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, here's the really scary thing is that there's not just a silver bullet fix for sexual harassment in our society. It's a tangled web. And that's why I've really been spending a lot of time on, the key areas. But for example, I introduced legislation on Capitol Hill to get arbitration clauses out of employment contracts, as we discussed earlier, to try and make this more transparent. I've been on a college campus tour to try and get to our young people early on. I wrote the book. I've been speaking at various other institutions, companies, to try and get them to pay more attention to, are they doing enough? I've been talking a lot to parents, because a lot of this goes back to how do we parent our girls, but more importantly, how do we parent our boys, which kind of gets lost in the shuffle in this discussion, because it really actually is a man's issue predominantly, and yet we call it a woman's issue, and that in and of itself gives it a negative connotation. And it kind of lets, men think like, oh, well, I don't have to pay attention to that because it's a woman's issue. Not because they don't care, but because they just think that it's not their issue. And so the bottom line, and the way I sum it all up, is that we need men in this fight. And so we need them to pay attention to this issue. We need them to hire more of us, pay us fairly, put us in roles of promotion and in boardrooms, because the interesting thing that doesn't happen when you have more women in powerful positions is sexual harassment. So that is the starting point. And so really this is a rallying cry for men to join us in this fight. The responsibility to fix this shouldn't all be on women's shoulders. This should be a partnership. And so that's my greatest hope. But it's a tangled web.
Also, I have to ask you personally, you've been a journalist for decades, and then now you have this sort of second life of being an advocate and a documentarian. Did you ever anticipate that you would have shifted direction so much?
No, it's not like you wake up one day and go, hey, I'm really glad and happy and thought that I might be like one of the poster children for sexual harassment in the workplace. But, here's the thing. And I actually think this is a really positive message to younger people. If they haven't found exactly what their passion is in their lives, it's like, it's never too late to be something different or to make yourself over or, make yourself really useful. And I grew up in a small town in Minnesota. I thought I was going to be a violin player. Then I went to Stanford University and I thought I was going to be a lawyer. Then I got sidetracked and I ended up in journalism. And then this whole thing happened. And so, I guess I never say no to any opportunity. And I think it's a great life message for anyone that life works in mysterious ways. And the constant for me has always been to make the most of every single day and opportunity. And that's why I'm working so hard on this.
Yeah, and you're putting in so much on the ground work, and I think that's really commendable. And it sounds like you really are seeing the change as it happens, or just being an agent of that change, which is, gosh, it's got to feel like a little bit of a revenge, right?
Well, you know what? I'm actually doing this for all the women out there who never had a voice. Predominantly all these thousands of women who still reach out to me every single day. It's sad because there's so many millions of stories out there, but they all feel like they were never heard. And if I had a national platform and I had the resources to be able to hire great lawyers, I want to be able to give a voice to these women who don't have those same opportunities. And it's one of the reasons that I set up the Gift of Courage Fund right after my settlement. I set up the Gretchen Carlson Leadership Initiative, which is workshops all across the country for underserved women for that exact reason, women who don't have the resources to get help on this issue. And there are millions of them. So, it's something that was really important to me to try and give a voice to all those women who nobody has ever cared about or nobody has ever heard. And it actually brings us full circle to Breaking the Silence and the doc, because it's actually the every woman's story. It's not famous people. It's you or me or anyone else down the street, or anyone else, the police officer or the firefighter or the teacher or the member of the military. It's everywhere. And I wanted to let all those women know that I cared about their stories.
I have to ask you about these projects that are out there in Hollywood. I know you can't probably talk about them at all, but there's a couple big projects out there that are using your story as part of a larger project. You know, I guess, what do you think? Like, do you think this is the right time to be talking about your story in that sort of narrative fiction way?
Well, yeah, you used an interesting word, fiction. There are two movie projects going on. Actually, one's a Showtime miniseries, which I think will be 8 parts, and that comes out in June. And it's a lot about what happened to me at Fox. And then there's a major motion picture that will come out after that. The thing is that because of my settlement, I can't have anything to do with these projects, and that can be frustrating because when it's about your life and about something that was such a painful experience, you hope that it's accurate, and if you can't participate in it, there's no guarantee that it will be. So, I'm a little hesitant about whether or not the projects will be true to life. And my greatest hope is just that they did, as much research as possible so that the story is true.
I know you have a couple more projects with Lifetime. There's a couple more things in the works, right?
Yeah, so I signed a production deal with them last April. So Breaking the Silence was just the first documentary. People can see that on the Lifetime app now,
Okay.
since it already premiered. But then we have 2 other docs that we're brainstorming about now for ideas, and those will be coming out in 2019 now.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Gretchen. If you haven't seen the documentary yet, it's called Gretchen Carlson, Breaking the Silence. You can watch it on the Lifetime app, or you can visit mylifetime.com.